Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Daily Footy and Other Sports with yours truly Taz and of course Sean, who as ever is holding up his Riverside Stadium sign. Today's going to be again a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to very briefly touch on one topic, and we're all about fan opinion, and we're going to be getting a couple of calls in today, both friends of Sean. One will be talking a little bit about mixed martial arts, and another will be joining us to talk a little bit about football and in particular the Hall of Fame selections that we've made from our last video. So if you haven't checked it out, please check it out, watch it, subscribe, like it. We'd love to see your comments as well. But yeah, right, let's get cracking. So there are a couple of big NFL stories to discuss. We will only focus on one of them today, and it's on a certain Tom Brady. Yep, as I'm sure you're aware, he's just left the New England Patriots, who he's been with for over 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, and has won six Super Bowls with them. So he's left a team like that, and he's gone to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Why do you think he's made this decision?
So it's all about legacy, you can argue. He accomplished one legacy of being able to return to the pinnacle of even featuring in the Super Bowl a few years ago, and being able to be the Mr. MVP again and again. He's a guy that I'm not a massive NFL fan by any means, but he's a name that you cannot ignore. You have to know the name, and you can even argue it's similar to Cristiano Ronaldo in the sense he was at the top of his game, at the best position he could be, but he just wanted a new challenge. And it seems like he's gone for a new team, a new setup where it could easily go downhill, but he's there, he's got the quality, and he wants to show that he can do it at another club. Franchise.
Isn't 42 is quite late to look for a new challenge, isn't it?
Well, they said that about Ronaldo as well. But a guy who only recently won a few more Super Bowl medal rings, he needs to do something. He didn't feature at the latest Super Bowl, right? So maybe it's another reason why there may be some conflict. He wasn't in the Super Bowl this time. It wasn't the year previous, 2019. So maybe he wanted to go for new pastures, or maybe New England Revolution. They just wanted a new player as well. There's so many tangible factors.
Well, I mean, just looking at when he won his Super Bowls, he's only won one back-to-back by the looks of it. So he's won in 2002, 2004, 5, 2015, 2017, and then 2019. Yeah. Certainly in recent seasons, he's had a gap in all of his wins. I mean, what I would say about it is, I don't know. I've seen one team players, in different sports, including football, of course. And I really did genuinely think he could be another one of them. So, do you think that there must have been some sort of unrest or disagreement for him to have decided after 20 good years there, successful years? May I add as well, the Patriots are actually joint top in terms of Super Bowl wins with 6, and all 6 have been won, with Brady there. I think Bill Belichick as well, I think, has been there the whole time as well. It's obviously no coincidence, but why would you leave a side that has been so successful? Do you think
you can even look? Yeah, there's a possibility. Even on the route towards the final, the match before the Super Bowl final, he wasn't necessarily the best player for that season. However, he had a renaissance, and he was actually then at the end beginning to deliver again, similar to Ronaldo at the latter half for Juventus. Don't know why I used that as an example, but you can argue that the other players that were also performing to an exceptional level were probably not getting the plaudits that they probably merited. And you can also argue maybe Brady just wanted a final payday, and at the age of 42, he probably wanted too much from the New England Patriots, and Tampa were willing to give that extra cash.
Yeah, possible. I mean, I guess in football terms, you know, when a player gets to their 30s, they're probably looking for one last big payday. Probably won't be for longer than a couple of years max, you know, in terms of a contract. And then after that, most players are just sort of on a year-by-year basis, aren't they? But yeah, it's possible. And the fact that he's playing and has been playing at really high level even into his late 30s and now into his 40s is a massive credit to him. And yeah, it's very possible he might be able to do something there. But do you reckon? I mean, I've not been hearing enough about Tampa Bay to feel like they might be able to turn it around. Do you think he can make that kind of difference and really give them a season or two where they could actually, you know, not just do well in the postseason, but also maybe even challenge for the Super Bowl? Do you think that's feasible?
So first of all, as if the season's actually able to restart, because we do not know about the current climate, and that actually is
actually, yeah, though, don't they?
Yeah, they do start a bit later, but that's why hasn't been postponed yet. However, we did speak about the Olympics having an impact yesterday 2 days ago, about athletes who were near the end of their careers and then having a delay of the postponement of the Olympics may hinder their performances. So that could be a factor which has to be noted for someone of like Tom Brady's caliber. However, you can argue that he's there to perhaps help his teammates get an understanding, the experience of what it means to be at that type of high pressurized matches. It's a major thing seen in American sports that you need that one particular sports star. We've seen Zlatan Ibrahimovic go to LA Galaxy, seen as a big guy. We've seen in different sports like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, all these guys, although they've got a talented set of players around them, you need that one particular superstar that helps to make everyone have less pressure and perhaps perform to a better level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it might just be they needed a boost, a special talent, sort of kind of give them a bit of hope. You know, Bruno Fernandes has done that for United. He's lifted average players to a better level, sort of. He's lifted good players to a level that you'd expect from them. So maybe Brady will have the same effect. Obviously, I know you wanted to bring in one or two of your chums right now. Are they ready?
Both of our chums. Let's see if they're ready.
Separately.
Yeah. Okay, and then let's see.
First, is it?
I'm calling Mr. MMA.
The MMA fan.
Oh, it's
What's his name?
MMA.
Well, I'll let you do the intro.
So his name is Abraham Lincoln. Let's see if we can get through to him.
Yeah,
sure. Abraham Lincoln. Mr. Abraham Lincoln, are you? Is your video coming on by any chance?
Yeah, I'll sort it out. 1 second. I'm just praying. Can I come back in 5 minutes and we start? I'm so sorry. Can you give me 5 minutes?
Okay, it's all right.
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay.
I just need to go and do my duty to God.
All right.
Okay. To you guys after and to the wider.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Back in a minute.
Can you put your conversation down if possible? Because we need to introduce another guy.
Should I put my video off?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
All right, cool. There you go.
Okay, so I guess our plan.
You can tell we're a fresh channel because we're still trying to work out how to do these things in a very smooth way. As you can tell, that was our first call in.
So now we're gonna have. I think we're gonna shift our plans a bit towards Off topic of
I thought we were going to get your
yesterday.
football friend in first anyway, actually. I
Okay, yeah, we did have a shift.
I think you messed up. I think it was you.
Okay, I apologize. Let's get him right away. Let's see if we
Ready.
can, if he's available. As soon as he starts talking, we were introduced to him. He's actually quite a big person. Felt quite honoured that he's been able to join us. He's a big body. He's actually done quite a few decent movies as well.
Yes.
Hello, guys. This is a pleasure. We've got here Mr. ARMAAN Karmani. He's done quite a few really good movies. So honoured that you've been.
What are we talking about, lads? What's on the agenda?
Well, I heard you had a few things to sort of discuss regarding the Hall of Fame selections.
Well, David Ginola plays on the left, and he's a left-footed player. To put him right wing, you guys, you can't be clowns like that. You can't be mugging us off. I mean, first Corona's mugging us off, then you lot start a podcast, then you're mugging us off, telling the whole world that David Ginola is the all-time Hall of Fame right winger from the Premier League. What's wrong with you guys? Like, you should be talking about the Beckhams of this world. You should be talking about maybe Steven Gerrard playing on the right, maybe Lampard having a makeshift position. I don't know, because you got to squeeze in these players. You can't give me David Ginola and then both of you agree on him as a right winger when he's a left-footed player who only played left wing. So, anyways.
Wow. And welcome.
It happens, boys.
No, I mean, I think Sean and I got way too. I think Sean and I got way too carried away with wanting to pick him, so we got, yeah. But no, I think we wanted to maybe consider someone like Beckham, but I think we wanted to have a really good mix. So
I think it's unfashionable to bring up David Beckham in any Hall of Fame because he's more known for his hairstyle than his footballing ability. But I tell you something, nobody could bend it like Beckham.
Yeah.
By far. I mean, who would you pick on the right if you could then?
He says just pick the Man United midfield because they all know each other, they all play with each other. That 99 midfield would pretty much be not too far off the Hall of Fame. But I think you've got to consider the Lampards, the Vieiras, and the Gerrards. I struggle to think anyone else that could.
Hang on a minute. You just had a go at us for picking a lefty on the right, and you're picking central midfielders on the right now.
No, on the right. I thought you were asking me in midfield. On the right. I mean, Liverpool had one of their best seasons with Gerrard playing from the right under Benitez. As much as he wanted to play in centre, he just wasn't disciplined enough defensively to play central. It's not a popular opinion. But if you go back to Champions League 2005, and this is a great thing that I talk about internally with my friends, but a lot of people don't realise that Gerrard was a lot to blame for us going down 3-0 in that first half. Because he didn't pick ARMAAN, he picked Alonso and Gerrard in that final. And ARMAAN was the guy that was known for holding, but he trusted Gerrard, obviously captain as well at the time, to play that role because Alonso was the playmaker. And it was just absolutely run out of midfield defensively, and the creativeness of AC Milan on the day. I mean, they had probably one of the Hall of Famers playing that day anyways, and we got run through midfield, and before you knew it, we were 1-0 down, 2-0 down, and then we got sucker punched before half-time, and we're 3-0 down. And if you think about what happens after half-time, as he has to bring ARMAAN on, obviously that lets Gerrard loose to go forward and Alonso a little bit more because you got no choice now, you're 3-0 down. But tactically, that was the problem with Gerrard. Like, when you played him in centre, he just wasn't defensively disciplined enough. And unfortunately, if you look at Premier League or Champions League victories, especially in that era, you just had to be defensively solid. So Gerrard ended up playing on the right for us for quite a lot of that season. So when we're talking about who you'd put in Hall of Fame, I would probably pick Gerrard to come in from the right. Overall, better footballer than Beckham. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you need set pieces, then Beckham's your guy.
That's a really, really good argument. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And who would you pick as your two inductees, if you could right now?
Alan Shearer has to go in there for what he did with Newcastle, considering they weren't in the top four ever competing really for the title at any point with Newcastle, and then he has won a title with Blackburn, and then he's all-time top goal scorer, and he was just a machine. Like, injuries or no injuries, he just came back. I mean, what you must... I don't know the stats on the top of my head, but I can't imagine he ever went a season without 25 goals across all competitions. And for somebody who played, I don't know, best part of 10 to 15 seasons, that's a pretty impressive record. And he was a tough guy. He scored against everyone as well. And of course, then for England as well, he was captain and had a phenomenal record. So Shearer has to be, for me, that number one choice. The number two becomes slightly trickier, but I think you guys ended up going for Henry, but I would have gone.
No, we went for Giggsy.
So we went for Giggsy. Fair enough. See, that was yours. So was that the actual Hall of Fame? Like, they've gone.
No. I mean, like, so they haven't actually decided on the official date or anything.
Okay.
Got company.
Oh, it's fine. Have I come in at the wrong time? I can get up for a bit.
Yeah, it's okay, Lincoln.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shout when you want me in, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, bro.
Guys, they haven't actually decided on the official Hall of Fame date or anything like that. But we just thought it would be great for us to speculate, who we would put in there, and we just thought, well, let's have a sort of a best 11.
Well, Giggs. Listen, it's tough to argue with Giggs. I mean, I don't think I'd argue with Giggsy, but Henry had a phenomenal impact on the Premiership, and he was unplayable. And I think I was just a bit biased because I was thinking about your strikers. But yeah, I mean, I'd go with Giggsy. If you pick Giggsy in front of, I mean, if you think about it, interestingly enough, Giggsy and Henry played in the same position. People don't remember that.
Henry did also spend quite a lot of time in up front as well, though.
He did.
Do you think that they'll be willing to pick two strikers? Because I guess he'd probably be classified more as a striker.
Oh no, I think Giggs goes in first it's a bit funny because what does it really mean? Like, if you pick the first two, does it mean that they're the best ever, or are you just picking the best two? So I'm not really sure I can read too much into that.
Yeah.
I think Giggs will end up getting it, one, because he's homegrown from the British Isles. But at the same time, he probably was in the Premiership and played more games over a longer period of time and won more titles. So it makes sense to give it to Giggs and the argument for Giggs. But I guess what I was trying to say was when Henry was, if you remember what happened, and correct me if I'm wrong here, they sold Nicolas Anelka to Real Madrid at a time when he was on fire and replaced him with the left winger from Juventus. Was it Juventus? I can't remember where he came in from.
Yeah,
one of the two. And he comes in on the left wing, so he didn't start up front for Arsenal. And then he became so lethal cutting in from the inside that he had to play up front. And I just wonder if Giggs was more of a natural goal scorer, would eventually he have also been pushed up front? Because Giggs is not really renowned for his goal scoring ability, although he could score, and he did score, but he wasn't prolific in terms of his goal scoring.
Absolutely.
It was more about... And one thing that people don't remember about Giggs, and I'll tell you this, is in that 99 season, he didn't actually start a lot of games. Ferguson, if you go back and look at the stats, Ferguson actually had him on the bench quite a lot and preferred Jesper Blomqvist, which is weird because you'd never, ever imagine Blomqvist in any sort of Premier League 11 all-time Hall of Fame. But it's just because in 99, Giggs scores. In fact, he scored that goal against Arsenal coming off the bench. And what I'm trying to say about Giggs is, as amazing as he was also somebody who was a little bit inconsistent, but people don't want to remember it because he was in such a successful team that his period of being less consistent was irrelevant because he was still winning leagues coming off the bench. And he must have won, like 3 or 4 leagues in the last 3 or 4 sort of years of his life, or whatever he did. And he was a bit part player where he was just renewing his contract year on. So his record is amazing, is brilliant, and he's had a phenomenal career. But I still think Henry naturally was a better player.
I think that's
Did you also argue? Yeah, I agree completely with ARMAAN just right here, our superstar here, because he's also talking about the nostalgic effect that people look at these guys like Ryan Giggs and Alan Shearer. There was also a period when, as a Middlesbrough fan, we were linked with Ryan Giggs to be traded for Stuart Downing. So, as ARMAAN said, it was actually really well publicized rumor. So Arman has brought some brilliant points up there. And also, the reason why I think Ryan Giggs ultimately does get the position of being the Hall of Famer with Shearer is longevity. Because as Arman said, Henry was amazing, but so was Cristiano Ronaldo, was just that player above all of them. But he just did it for 2 seasons in England.
Yeah. I mean, would you not include Wayne Rooney?
Yeah.
I mean,
he never seems to come. It's weird that he doesn't come into a discussion. I mean, I know that you're talking about retired players, but in terms of being prolific, I mean, think about the seasons Rooney's given to the Premiership in terms of. I mean, his record must be up there with very close to Shearer's. It can't be that far off it.
Yeah, Waz at 2.5. No.
Yeah.
He got over 250 for United, and he obviously scored a few for Everton as well.
Yeah.
Can't be.
He was never disciplined. He was never disciplined. That's his problem. Since Ferguson's last season, he was too busy getting drunk, partying, smoking, looking for grannies, and just like Jack Wilshere, he just threw away so much potential. There was a period where Rooney was actually better than Ronaldo and Messi when they were very young, at 20 and 21, but he just was not disciplined enough. And I think that goes against Rooney when we're trying to give him any plaudits of how much of a good player he could have been.
Yeah, that's a fair point as well. I just think Sean and I said in our last video that we weren't looking forward to seeing Rooney and Aguero retire, because when they're in the mix, the conversation, it gets super messy. I mean, Aguero v Henry in itself is an insane conversation for best foreign striker. Everyone's going to have their own opinions about that as well.
Well, I would say if Liverpool end up winning another European Cup in the next couple of seasons, and these players, they retain the squad, you're going to have very awkward conversations about Jordan Henderson. You're going to have very awkward conversations about the impact of Mo Salah, because he's not in the same conversations. But if you end up winning 2 European Cups and the Premier League, it's going to get very mucky. And then people are going to talk about where does Bobby Firmino fit in now? Is he a midfielder? Is he up front? You're gonna have to change your formation for your Hall of Fame 11. And then of course you can't be far away with. You're talking about centre backs. I mean, Van Dijk would be like shooing.
I've got 2 questions for you. I've got 2 questions for Arman. First off, could you? This is a bit of inside information. He was at the Liverpool-Roma game. I want him to describe the atmosphere, the game, the impact. So this is why he's talking about Liverpool's impact in the Champions League. And second of all, we've got Taz who talks about Man United players, and I talk about Middlesbrough players. Are there any other Liverpool stars from the past, like Fernando Torres, you would think that could break in, who could be considered being in part of the Hall of Fame?
Robbie Fowler. I'll answer the second question first. I think Robbie Fowler, as a prolific goal scorer and just how good he was as a finisher, I think he was just very, very unlucky that he played at the same time as Alan Shearer did, same time as Andy Cole did, same time as Teddy Sheringham did, and you can only have two strikers really. And there's this thing with Liverpool that's quite unique to Liverpool, as in they've always cared a lot more about Liverpool than they have about England. So because you don't get the England marketing rub on Liverpool players, and especially didn't back then, when the national team was considered to be superior to the Premiership. It's not so much anymore, but in the 90s, the kind of spectrum of how you measured greatness was quite skewed in favour of international and the media hype. So I think Fowler never got the recognition. But if you look at those Liverpool fans call him God, and there's a reason they call him that, because he was phenomenal for a Liverpool striker. You got to understand as well, he wasn't following some weak strikers or heritage, that he was one of the pioneers. He wasn't. He was following people like Ian Rush. So to follow that up and to be as clinical as he was, and he was just a phenomenal finisher. At a time when maybe pace wasn't everything, because that's probably one area he couldn't compete. But I think if you're going to have a Hall of Fame discussion, there's other players like Matt Letitia. You've got to understand how amazingly talented that guy was, and he only ever played for Southampton, and consistently smashed it in the Premiership. Jermaine Defoe might be someone that you need to have a conversation about. He's been very, very consistent as well. But because they haven't played for England and they haven't played for the top clubs at a time when they've been successful, sometimes it's difficult to bring them in the same conversation because we're all biased in terms of the information we receive. In terms of your first question, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not a fan that ends up going to a lot of matches. I'm a football TV watcher. Big fan, but I watch more on TV. Oh, yeah. But that season in particular, I had a bet on with a friend of mine. And my bet was basically I put £1,000 down on Liverpool to win the Champions League. No, actually, let me rephrase. I put a bet down that Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus, and Bayern Munich wouldn't win the Champions League. And my original pick was Liverpool, but I got the whole field, anyone else. So I had £1,000 on Liverpool. Obviously, I support them as well, and any other team that wasn't one of the top 5 favourites of the season. And I made the bet when the last 16 draw had happened, and I was standing to win $8.5 grand. I had 8.5 to 1 on that bet. So the thing was, as a Liverpool fan, obviously I'd been watching them all season, and in the group stages, there was a game, I think it was away to Porto, in the group stages of that season. And you got to remember, we hadn't qualified for Champions League the season before, and we hadn't been in the Champions League the season before that as well, because we were in the UEFA Cup final. So I've been watching this team develop, and in the group stages, we drew Porto, and Porto at that time, if I'm not wrong, undefeated at home in the Champions League. I think, ever. They had some sort of crazy record. And if I'm not wrong, we went away there, and that was the first time in the group stages that people weren't really talking about Bobby and Mane and Salah as a partnership at that moment. But when I watched that game, I remember where I was as well. We beat them, I think it was 6-0 or something. And this is a team that had never lost at home. And I'm not saying Porto are like giants of European football, but just watching how we destroyed them on the day, I was like, man, we are onto something. And I could see that Klopp philosophy and style starting to get really exciting at a high level. Because previously, we'd only really seen it at UEFA Cup level, and you can't really compare Champions League to Europa League, right? So I put the bet on. So then I put the bet on the last 16 with a guy who was just not giving Liverpool a chance. He was a United supporter as well. And he basically said, you got no chance. And then we drew, in the quarters, we drew City. You might remember that season. As City were as strong as ever. So I was like, oh, fuck, because we wanted to avoid City of all the teams. Because I always thought European teams wouldn't be able to take our pace. But the one team I didn't want was an English team, because player for player, City were one team that could match us player for player in terms of pace. So we drew them in the quarters, and we done a job on them at home, and that was the day that I watched Henderson transform. Because in the away leg we shut them out, and this is a City team that was scoring 6-7 goals, 5-6 goals, 3-4 goals. They weren't winning by 1 or 2 goals. So once we got through City, then I think in the semis we drew Roma, and we got a good draw there. Because I think Real had some nightmare. They drew Juventus or something. I think they had Juve as well on their run to the final.
In the quarters, Ronaldo did a overhead kick in the quarterfinal.
Yeah,
and then it was Bayern.
That was Buffon's last game as well. Do you remember at the time?
Yeah.
So they had a really bad run, and we got a favourable draw in the semis. We ended up getting Roma, and also just I'll tell you something really interesting. I can't remember who did Real draw in the semis? Do you remember?
Bayern Munich.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because they had their own goal. It was so annoying. I think Bernat as well.
I don't think it was Bayern, my friend. I think it was another team. Because I ended up having, in the last 16, I had the worst draw. If you go back and look at the last 16 draw of that season, all my teams, what I wanted, because I had my bet on, right? I needed my team to play against each other, so I'd be guaranteed to go forward as one of my teams. But all of my teams drew the big horses. So I had the worst draw in the last 16. And as a result, what happened was, just out of nowhere, in the semis, I had 3 teams now going into the final. So my bet was live. I could have won the bet if Real lost in the semi, right? That's season. So I had 3 teams going into the semis, and Liverpool got Roma. So I was going up. Sorry for this really long answer, but I was going up to the Anfield leg. I was going to the Anfield leg with my 8.5 bet live, but also I was guaranteed a team in the final. Because even if Liverpool had to not win, Roma would get through, and therefore I was live all the way to the final now. Because if Roma win the Champions League, I win 8.5 grand, right? So my bet's live. So I went up to Anfield, and I had to end up. I paid 450 quid for an £8 ticket. The face value was 8, but he sold it to me for 450, and I went completely by myself as well. And you got to understand, this was my first ever trip to Anfield as well. I hadn't been to Anfield before that. Anyways, I got there. By the way, that was also the day that Sean Cox got battered by the fans, and he got really it was really bad. But there was stuff going on outside, and then I got there, and pretty much one of the greatest footballing days of my life, because it's the first leg of the Champions League, and Roma started off all right in that game. I tell you, we were nervous. The crowd were nervous, and then I think Salah scored, and he scored a phenomenal one after that as well, from outside the area. And like before we knew it was like 3-0, 4-0, and then I think it finished. Was it 6-2 or 5-2? I can't remember.
5-2. Yeah.
Yeah, but
5-2.
But I think we were 5-0 up though, and then it became 5-1 and 5-2. They got 2 right at the end. So it was pretty much like the greatest atmosphere you can ever imagine, because it was our first season back in the Champions League, my first trip to Anfield, my bet was live, all fans just being like cuckoo. We haven't lost, like, at this stage, we haven't lost a European tie for like 2 seasons, because we'd made it to the final as well for the Europa League. Since the Europa League final. And then we got to, 5-2. And then I tried to get tickets to go to the Rome leg for the away. Yeah. But once it was 5-2, I was like, this is over. So I didn't end up going. And then it wasn't over because we conceded 3 out there. And it was a nightmare. We had to hold off in the last 2 minutes. And obviously Liverpool reached the final. And that was one of the worst days of football in my life, because I'm live for 8.5 grand going into the final. But Real Madrid, the one team out of the 4 that I didn't have, make it to the final, and then they take the lead because of a Karius mistake, and then a second Karius mistake makes it 2-0. Then we come back into it at 2-1, and then Bale scores the most phenomenal overhead kick you can ever imagine to kill the tie on a 1-leg game. So it was like
it was 1-1, bro. It was 1-1 at a point. Mane equalized to make it 1-1.
Maybe it was. I don't think was it 1-1 or was it 2-1? I can't remember what happened, but you might be right.
It came 2-1 eventually.
But the point was that it was 2 Karius mistakes that just should never have happened. And I was talking about this earlier. I was just thinking, like, on a footballing one, I don't know why Liverpool have never invested in a top-line goalkeeper before Alisson. It's actually unheard of, because if you think about how much we've been craving the league for, like, they keep saying 20 or 30 years, it just doesn't add up, because you had Mignolet for 5 years, you had people like Sander Westerveld, you had Dudek, who we won the Champions League with. Before that, we used to have like Brad Friedel and David James. With all due respect, all of these are very good, consistent keepers, but none of them were world elite keepers. None of them. The only one maybe was Pepe Reina that we ended up having.
I was about to ask about him, actually. I think he's good, but I wouldn't say he's elite.
Yeah, and we sold him as well. And when we sold him, we used like Simon Mignolet from Sunderland or something.
Yeah.
And it was like, how do you get rid of Pepe Reina and get Mignolet? And then you kept getting new keepers in and kept Mignolet starting. And then when Mignolet dropped, you got Karius from bloody Mainz or something. And it was like, as soon as he sold him and we got Alisson, I was like, well, by the way, I saw Alisson play that night when I went to Anfield, because he played with the Roma goalkeeper. And I was a bit nervous. I was like, bro, we've just signed a keeper who let in like 8 goals over 2 legs. But true to say, Alisson has been pretty much phenomenal since we signed him. And it's no surprise to me that Liverpool have started to go up the league after signing a top-line goalkeeper, which if you think about it, they've just never had one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've got another question for you, Arman. Then, so we're talking about one epic moment, and I even remember all the videos you were sharing with us during the Liverpool-Roma game. How did you feel about the Roma-Barcelona situation, that match? Because Roma was one of your sides. How did you go through the similar emotions as well when Roma did their comeback?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That Roma were dead and buried, and then they killed Barcelona. And the thing that people don't remember is Barca had that in that season, and they lost a 3-0 lead, right? And what happened the following season? They lost a 3-0 lead to Liverpool.
Exactly.
So they've done it twice. And by the way, in between, they had a season where they came back from a 4-1 drubbing to PSG and beat them 5-5 on aggregate and went on away goals. So Barcelona got some funny business going on in Europe because they're conceding a lot of goals, or they're losing ties from. And I'm not trying to be devil's advocate here, but if you were somebody who's thinking about match fixing and conspiracies in football, you got to be looking at that Barca team. 3 in a row, they've lost 3-0 to. They've lost a 3-0 lead to Roma. Yeah. They've lost a 3-0 lead to Liverpool, and they've come back from a 4-1 drubbing against PSG. There's some funny business going on there, man.
Yeah.
I think they lost to, when they came back against PSG, that's the match after they lost to Juventus as well. Had a bit of a battering against Juventus as well.
Yeah.
I think that's why people used to argue that, when Atletico Madrid was the worst opponent for Liverpool, because it wasn't a team like Barcelona who's got so many defensive penalties. You were playing a team of that caliber. Oh, I've got to change the topic quickly. What T-shirt are you wearing? Is it a certain wrestler? Big Cena fan there.
Right, guys, we need to wrap it up with the football. We have one more guest ready to go. So, but we would definitely love you back on the call. You've got time.
It's a pleasure. Nice one, boys. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, buddy.
Take care, man. Love you, bro. Love you, bro. Hey, hello, everybody. This is another guest here, another guy who's enjoying the isolation period. Lincoln, are you there?
Give me one. Here I am.
Hey.
Yeah, this is Abraham Lincoln. He's been away from America. He's introduce yourself and let us know about your sport. What sporting expertise you'll be introducing to us today.
All right. First of all, assalamu alaikum, guys. Hope you're doing well. Enjoying the conversation. It was quite interesting to see this conversation about football. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second, I think, because it's something I've never understood, the love of football. People love sports, and different people love different sports. I'm addicted to Jiu Jitsu, for example, whereas you guys love football. And that's very interesting to me because I don't understand the reasons for that. I mean, it's in our DNA to fall in love with some type of extracurricular activity. But whereas one person might fall in love with football, another will fall in love with something completely different, like a violent sport. So it's quite interesting to see that.
I'd argue I'm greedy.
Yeah.
Sean will tell you I like a bit of every sport, so
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean,
the background.
Yeah. Oh, what background? My background? Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
No. There's Taz's background.
I'll introduce myself. Nothing too interesting. I went to university with Sean many years ago when I was a young man. In 2006 to 2009, we were at Queen Mary University together, and I studied aerospace engineering there. After that, I became a secondary school science teacher, which wasn't my ideal career choice. Then I went into lecturing for a university on an access to medicine course, which was more in my region of thinking, so to speak. So I quite enjoyed that. And over the years, it's been good to see how people have been developing, like Sean, like yourself, and how we've jumped on this podcasting bandwagon now. I'm quite enjoying it. It's a good thing. It's quite exciting, and hopefully
it popped up out of nowhere. We haven't we just spent so much time just talking about these topics on WhatsApp, and we just thought, well, I think everyone's got more time right now. We may as well just put it on video.
Isolation can be the mother of creativity. You know about Isaac Newton? They had a quarantine sort of situation going on in Cambridge in his time, and he had to go home. And during that time, whilst he was isolated at home, he came up with his understanding of gravity, which was paradigm shifting in physics, anyway. and in the world. So I think isolation is a great thing, even when looking at it from a religious perspective. You know about, if you're a Muslim, you'd know about the Prophet living in the cave for many, many days, going and isolating himself, and then receiving revelation. The Yunus in the belly of the whale, he received inspiration in the belly, and God forgave him. So there's many, without turning this into a religious discussion, there's many examples we can see in our history of the benefits of isolation. And sometimes you just need to be alone with your own thoughts to recalibrate and re-understand which direction life's heading in. Sometimes when you're outside in the world, I think life takes us over and it blinds us to the direction we're heading in. Whereas when you're at home, you see your family, you have time to think. You can reflect on where you've been going wrong, and then you can change things that you might have not done before. So I think there's a benefit in it, definitely.
I have to ask though. I mean, so you're a big mixed martial arts fan. What brought you into that world in the first place?
To be honest, this might sound strange, but I'm not really a fan of mixed martial arts. I do mixed martial arts. I'll talk about it all day, but I'm not a fan of it. It's a bit of a dichotomy, because I came into mixed martial arts about 10 years ago, and I came into it for the reason of self-defense. At that time, the EDL was going around. There was a lot of fear-mongering on the streets. You couldn't walk down some streets without getting into some situation, no matter how hard you tried to avoid it. And as a result, I thought there's a necessity for me to know something to defend myself with. Not to be an aggressor, but to be someone who can defend myself and my family. I thought that was a right I owed to myself, and I owed to the people around me. So I got into boxing initially, and I learned a bit about boxing. Then I got into judo, did a bit of judo. Then Muay Thai, Thai boxing. And all of those arts didn't really click with me. I enjoyed them. I saw their utility. But when I got into Jiu-Jitsu, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, whatever you want to call it, that's what really resonated with me. Because
Royce Gracie, the legend of MMA. I met him once.
His story is interesting because his family, the Gracie family, originally understood Jiu-Jitsu as a means of self-defense. And now it's become synonymous with sports. And I got into it for the same reasons, really. I got into it as a means of self-defense, and I found it very, very useful. The principles of Jiu-Jitsu, if you were to use them in a street fight to de-escalate it or to escalate it, it's like a volume switch. You can escalate a fight, you can de-escalate a fight with Jiu-Jitsu. It gives you that power. They're very useful and very intellectually sound, which is what made it interesting, because Jiu-Jitsu was an activity which required intelligence and thinking. I think boxing requires the same. But to me, I feel Jiu-Jitsu appealed to me cerebrally more than the other arts did. So I got into it. Been training 8 years now, 9 years. I received my purple belt 2 years ago from Marco Cantor at Fight Zone Academy in London. Big shout out to Fight Zone. And yeah, ever since then, I've just been trying to improve myself, get better, refine my technique, help others through refining their technique, and give back to society really with Jiu-Jitsu. I think it's a good altruistic art in that you go and you train with others, they improve, you improve, and you also try and help others improve their technique. And through that, you create bonds with people, and you become a better person because you begin to understand people more. Your ego goes down. Like, for example, when I first trained Jiu-Jitsu, I was a big muscular guy, went into a gym. A guy 1/4 literally the size of me took me and wiped my floor on the mat with technique. And I said, wow, do that again. You must have fluked it. The third arm lock later, after being arm locked 3 times, I kind of
teach
realized,
me.
Huh?
Yeah,
teach me. How do you do that? I mean, and it killed my ego because I think a lot of us walk around with an inflated opinion of ourselves and an inflated opinion and a misconception of what our abilities are in a street fight or in a situation. And it doesn't only apply to fighting. I think it applies to a lot of other things. And when you go onto a jiu-jitsu mat and somebody takes that away from you, it's like your whole world's been cracked and the curtain's been lifted from your eyes. So it was an eye-opening experience. It was a humbling experience to be beaten up by someone like that. And it was an experience which I took and used as fuel to learn more. And I think it was very beneficial in there. Now in my life, when I look at things, I think jiu-jitsu influences the way I look at them. I think there's a lot of parallels between jiu-jitsu and religion, which I didn't really appreciate before. But jiu-jitsu helped me to experience those parallels in a physical form, so now I can appreciate them much more.
That's brilliant.
Making it a long philosophical discussion.
No,
I love the connection there. It's really
good. We're all here for a sport. We're a sports show. We're here to talk about the power of different sports, and you're talking about how impactful jiu-jitsu is. It's brilliant. This is why I really appreciate you being here to talk about your insight. But I do also have one.
Is it something that you? I mean, obviously, jiu-jitsu is not really readily available on TV, for example. Is it? Do you? I mean, when you watch sports, what do you sort of prioritize when you watch sports? Do you do it much, or do you just sort of see whatever is available?
I don't watch many sports. I do watch mixed martial arts on occasion, and I'm able to appreciate the grappling in there much more now than I could 10, 15 years ago as a casual fan. So when I see someone on the ground and I see someone putting off a move on them, I can appreciate the angles and the movement, and I see the art in it, whereas others might not. And that's reflected in the UFC, because many fans don't understand the jiu-jitsu. What they'll do, they'll stand up the people on the ground after a little while. And I think that's unfair, because on the ground, to get someone to the ground, first of all, it's hard. It's hard to get someone to the ground.
And
once
keep
you to keep there, it's hard as well if you don't know what you're doing. And if they're strong and big, and if they also have technique, it's very difficult. To get someone to the ground and keep them there, you've expended a lot of energy. You put a lot of effort into it. And after being there for 2-3 minutes, just because the crowd doesn't understand it and it might lack popularity, the referee will stand you up. I think that's a big element. That contains a big element of unfairness. And just because someone doesn't understand fighting, I don't believe that it should mean that the fight isn't allowed to continue. You can see the evolution in the UFC from when it was back in 91 to now. They've kind of watered it down. They've dumbed it down a little bit. Back in the day, you had much more freedom to do things than you have now. And that's a reflection of how people's understanding, because the UFC molds itself on the basis of fans, which is understandable. The fans want to see something, we'll give them it. The fans don't want to see people on the ground for a long time because they don't understand it, we'll stand them up because the fight's getting boring. In real life, in a real fight, if you have someone on the ground and you're controlling them, you're in a good position. Stay there forever if you can. Carry on. Sorry, Sean, you're saying.
It's a brilliant point. I wanted to ask you then, do you prefer fighters like Ken Shamrock, Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell? Those were fighters that perhaps had more freedom in order to display their ability.
They had more freedom in that time with Pride and the UFC and where they fought. You could appreciate the way they fought, but now jiu-jitsu's developed. It evolved over time. It adapted, just like this virus might adapt. There's some parallels. And because of the evolution of jiu-jitsu and the understanding now being greater than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago when those guys were fighting, you see a completely different game now. So I can appreciate both sides. I can appreciate the classic old school side, and I can appreciate the new type of jiu-jitsu that we see now, which is being translated onto the mat and into the UFC. What happened back in the day was a lot of the people who taught jiu-jitsu would keep a lot of secrets. They'd hide a lot of it. And people would go there, they'd teach them half of a technique and not show them the nuances. So therefore, people would be walking around on the street not really understanding jiu-jitsu. Over the years, that's gone. Now there's no more secrets. People are teaching others freely things that were not known 20 years ago. Partly due to that and partly due to the evolution of jiu-jitsu, you have a new format of jiu-jitsu that's being used now. You have a new understanding. You can't go into and other things have developed as well. People have become better wrestlers. They've understood the use of wrestling in MMA. They've become better strikers. 20 years ago, you go into a UFC fight like Royce Gracie, not know any striking and beat your opponent. Now even the striking's at such a high level, and it's adapted towards, beating wrestlers and beating people who have good jiu-jitsu. The game's changed. Jiu-jitsu's had to adapt as well. So now you see a completely different type of jiu-jitsu on the mat than you saw 20 years ago.
And then another question then, a fight that was not postponed.
You're lucky, I have to deal with this all the time,
What?
I have to deal with this all the time.
I'm always disturbing, I'm sorry.
No, I like it. It's a two-way thing. I enjoy it. It's like me chilling, relaxing. It's a good it's like being in my living room. It's good.
So Lincoln, he does look like Abraham Lincoln. I've been saying it for 200 years.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. Once I was in a university lecture and the room had 300 people in it, maybe. And I see this guy walking in with a bomber jacket, bouncing around like a gangster. And it's Sean. Sean, who we're talking to now.
Right.
Comes into the lecture theatre, he looks around, he points at me in front of 300 other people, and he goes, "Hey, this is Abraham Lincoln. This is Lincoln."
And you've never met him before this?
No, I knew him.
Oh, you knew him.
He had the audacity to walk into my lecture, point me out in front of 300 people,
wow,
highlight me as Abraham Lincoln, I never knew 292 of those people, probably. I don't know who they are. But now they know who I am. So I had to walk around in uni for the next 5 years with this stigma of being called Abraham Lincoln. So thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. I'll get you back one day. Karen, sorry.
You can come back on one of these calls and you can have a go at him. Yeah. It can be a make fun of Sean session. But
Isolation makes us stay for a long time. We're gonna have everyone come in. I want you to be around all the time. You, Armaan. So we want people talking. So, but I do want to ask you a serious question.
Yeah.
So a serious question is that one sporting event has not been postponed. An UFC mega fight of Khabib versus Tony Ferguson. A lot of people, and I'm raising this topic also because you just spoke about a very good point where a lot of people do not appreciate the art of wrestling. And people say Khabib is boring. People say, oh, he just fought with bears when he was little. That's not great. How do you perceive Khabib, and what's your possible prediction for two elite fighters fighting each other, both got very good wrestling, grappling abilities?
I think, first of all, it's important to understand, and I'm sure you know this, that Khabib is not just a wrestler. He has a background in Sambo, which is essentially wrestling combined with judo, combined with ground fighting. So Sambo came about in Russia as an amalgamation of many arts. Russia's right next to Japan. So judo came to Japan. Judo came from Japan to Russia. They took it on. Then you had the folk wrestling styles in the villages of Russia. And then you had ground fighting. And what happened, judo has its own component of ground fighting. So in Russia, all of these different arts cross-pollinated with each other. And then as a result, you had Sambo. And Sambo was officially taught to the Red Army, I believe, and to the Russian Special Forces. So it became somewhat a national activity through that. Khabib is a wrestler. Ferguson can wrestle as well, but at the same time, they have much more beyond just freestyle wrestling in their arsenals. For those people who say wrestling is a boring thing, I think they miss the point of the utility of wrestling. If you're a good wrestler and you're fighting someone who can punch and kick you very well, you have the ability to take them to the ground and take them away from their strengths. If you can't wrestle, you can't control the fight. If you're a wrestler and you strike well, you fight, you punch and kick well, and the other guy is an expert on the ground, you now have the ability to stay standing. So wrestling can be a double-edged sword, which will help you in many ways. You can take someone to the ground who's not very good at stand-up fighting, and you can fight standing up with someone who's not very good at the ground. Therefore, your wrestling gives you a key to attack different types of opponents. And I think this is what's misunderstood amongst many fans. They don't see the utility of wrestling. Wrestling is an amazing art. It allows you phenomenal levels of control. If you look at the Americans and their wrestling programs, it's grueling, it's tough, it's difficult. They say there's nothing as difficult as wrestling in the American uni curriculum. So for those casual fans...
Not your kind, Sean.
I know.
You know, interestingly enough, there's people from the WWE who've come into the UFC and done quite well, like Brock Lesnar. I think CM Punk came in, but I don't know how far he got.
Bobby Lashley.
Yeah, no.
Bobby Lashley. Yeah. And then there's another one as well. Huh? Sorry?
There was another fight. You know your Tito Ortiz?
Yeah.
He actually fought at Bellator against an ex-wrestler just a month or two ago against Del Rio, who was actually a talented Mexican wrestler who should have fought in the Olympics for Mexico, but he just wasn't able to compete, and Tito Ortiz knocked him out in one round. So it shows that there is some wrestling, WWE and UFC MMA connection. And furthermore, Gracie, his son, is recently joined Bellator. What do you think is do you watch Bellator by any chance? I don't really watch a lot of it.
I do know Bellator. I used to train with one guy who used to fight in Bellator. I won't mention his name right now. Maybe in the future I will. But yeah, I've trained. Huh?
Was a Strawberry by any chance?
He did not look like a strawberry.
Sorry. So
I get these nicknames from.
Is he the one that throws a Pokeball? The one who throws a Pokeball when he wins?
I don't think so. I'll get his permission and then I'll mention his...
Let's go with that. He's clearly not ready to tell us. So
I really don't mind. Just that I might get...
No, that's fine.
It's interesting. Because it's quite coincidental you've actually mentioned this, because the previous caller we had, he actually went to school with with the MMA fighter you might be talking about. So it just shows how much of a small world it is that maybe everyone knows each other.
Especially,
that's what I'm trying to do.
No, I appreciate it. There's nothing wrong with asking. I mean, I like the question. To take your point about small world, when I go to the gym and having trained in jiu-jitsu for the last 10 years, it's an even smaller world within mixed martial arts. So you'll meet famous people all of the time if you're training jiu-jitsu. If you go to Roger Gracie Academy in West London, you'll probably meet Guy Ritchie, who directed Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. If you go to the Machado Academy in California, you'll probably meet Keanu Reeves. If you go to the Gracie Academy in California, you'd meet someone else. I think the Machado Academy, I'm not sure if it's in California, so don't quote me on that. But yeah, what you will find is that because jiu-jitsu is a relatively small community and MMA is also relatively a small community, there's a lot of cross-communication between people. There's a lot of cross-training in your gym. When you walk in on one day, you're likely to find someone there who's famous. In our gym, we had, for example, Diego Silva, who's a UFC fighter right now. And he'd come in and train with us. I've rolled with him, I've sparred with him. So there's a lot of good in that sense. Because it's a small community, you can learn a lot from people who are experts and have been in the game for a long time. Whereas when the community gets bigger and wider, then it dilutes. And those people who have a lot of knowledge, now you haven't got as much access to them.
Yeah. It's a fantastic point you just raised. You know, Brock Lesnar, it's really fantastic how you talk about people within a small community, they work with each other. Like Brock Lesnar would often go back to his college and train with the fighters of Minnesota University. He would actually work with some of the fighters. So as you said, there's a lot of appreciation that a lot of athletes with the similar backgrounds will have for each other. And this is a big reason why it's going to be fantastic to regularly hear your input and your opinions within the sport, because I think a topic for another day, because I want you have to come back and we have to talk regularly, is what is the methodology for people who are unable to go to the gym now? How do you keep fit? Because I don't want it to be a lovely insight, so I think we can have that for another conversation, because I would really like to hear your input on that, because I don't want this to be a one-off thing. This is the message.
We can talk. I mean, even if I don't mind talking about today or another day, I mean, I don't mind coming back. There's so much that we could talk about. We got
to think about, you know, how everyone else is going to feel. They're probably going to be thinking, "Are these guys just going to go on and on and on?"
Yeah. On that note, I don't know if you were mentioning something about this coronavirus, but is that something that you talk about on your show?
I mean, Sean and I trying to try not to talk about it quite as much anymore, because it was something that was unavoidable at the start, I'd like to say, because of the fact that so many of these sports have basically been halted for that very reason.
Yeah, I can't train anymore.
Bit by bit, we're starting to realise that there are actually a lot of sort of other topics going on, and obviously getting loads of insight from yourself on things like jiu-jitsu, which, you know, myself and Sean aren't really quite as knowledgeable at. Is fantastic. It's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get, you know, different views, different sports. You know, that's exactly why we're here.
The reason I asked, I mean, obviously we won't talk about it if that's not the remit of the show, is I go on Facebook quite often now, being at home, and I go on Instagram and other places. And what I've seen on Facebook is quite worrying. There's a lot of knowledge that's lacking amongst people regarding this virus, how it started, its physiology, all of these things. And due to that, I think people are being exploited a lot in terms of false information. And they're taking this on board. And they're actually becoming people who don't help the situation, but rather are accelerating it in the wrong direction. So that's why I mentioned it. I thought maybe because your listeners one day might benefit from it. But yeah, that's another topic. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might very well have to wrap up anyway. It's coming up to about an hour or so anyway. I have to say, though, absolutely fantastic insight from you, buddy. I really appreciate it. Sure Sean does. He invited you. So, but please do come back. We definitely want to talk to you more.
Look at his top. Look at his top.
Huh?
Look at his top. Look at his top. Fight zone. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, well, for starters, I mean, you know, when sports are up and running again, I'm sure we're going to get more kind of MMA, jiu-jitsu related topics popping up in the news as well, and you'd be the ideal guy for that. So You're our go-to guy. We expect you to know everything.
I appreciate the confidence you have in me, which you'll probably lose after a few months, but yeah, I'll try and keep it going for as long as I can. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I think you guys, it's good to train. I mean, you guys should get into it. I think it's a low impact sport. It's very useful and it makes life more enjoyable. I feel like it gives you a challenge. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it might be a necessity for people to learn just because of where we're living.
I think our next topic, your next appearance will be giving us advice on how we can actually exploit the time that we've got available to us in order to train. Because this is you have to. I'm not sure. We have to appreciate your level of expertise, the privilege that you're able to give certain time, not just for me, Taz, for everybody's watching this. And this is the whole point, that everyone is in isolation. We need to connect to each other, different backgrounds. You said yourself, people like sports differently, but at the same amount. So it's nice to have a different output and connect with everyone.
Yeah, I would not say I'm an expert. I'm far from an expert. I'd still say I'm learning, as everyone is. Everyone would say that to you who does jiu-jitsu. But maybe it's like two cars on the road. Maybe one car's slightly ahead of the other and has seen what's on the road and can radio back to the car behind and say, look, this is coming up, that's coming up. So maybe I could highlight some things that I've learned, not from the point of view of an expert, but from the point of view of someone with some experience. So I think there's a difference between expertise and experience. I consider myself as a person with some experience, and through that experience, I have a bit more expertise than others maybe who haven't trained. But saying expert, whole right, it's not a title I'll give myself. But although I appreciate the gesture.
Hey, anytime. We're learning. We're learning day by day, thanks to you. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Right, well, thank you so much for joining us, buddy. See you later.
That's fine. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wow. That's fantastic. Is it gone? Well, that was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, this is what is fantastic to have everybody involved, and I think this is I think it's one of the most important video we've had, because now we're engaging with more fellow people in isolation. Now efficient. So it's about everybody communicating and just connecting. That's the main message. This is why we're doing this, and we have more people hopefully involved. Have ARMAAN and SOHAEL back as well, in order for us to continue this whole situation of isolation that we're going through.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a brilliant point for us to end anyway. But as we've said from the start, we absolutely love and appreciate all your comments. By all means, if you've got any questions about what you've heard today, either from us or indeed from our awesome guests today as well, we'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe. You've obviously got the option to do so in the corner again. If you'd love to be involved with one of our calls in future, whether you've got a particular type of sport or sports related activity that you'd like to discuss, maybe you're a bit of an expert at that, we'd love to hear about it. If you've got a question or conversation that you'd love to have about something that we've discussed, that would be brilliant as well. But yeah, Sean and I are going to leave it there, I think, for today. We've spoken a lot, but yeah, there we go. But we will stop for today, and we will see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.